A rifle shot echoed through the dusty streets of Riverton, Wyoming Territory, 1875, as Zara Reed crouched behind her father's lifeless body, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face, knowing her life as a young woman had just ended, and her survival as someone else was about to begin. The spring sun cast long shadows across the wooden boardwalks as Zara's trembling hands clutched her father's pocket watch. His final gift before the gang of outlaws had ambushed them outside the general store. At 20 years old, she was alone in a ruthless frontier town with no family, no protection, and a growing awareness that a woman traveling solo was prey in these parts. Slipping the watch into her pocket, she made a decision that would alter her destiny. Under the cover of darkness, Zara took scissors to her long auburn hair, watching the locks fall to the floorboards of the rented room above the saloon. With each snip, she shed another piece of her former self. The loose-fitting clothes she'd taken from her father's luggage hung awkwardly on her slender frame, but with a few adjustments, they would serve her purpose. Binding her chest tightly with strips of fabric torn from her petticoat, Zara practiced deepening her voice and widening her stance in the cracked mirror. By dawn, Zach Reed emerged from the room, a young man seeking work in the frontier, not a vulnerable woman grieving her father. The landlady barely glanced at the boyish figure descending the stairs, too preoccupied with her morning duties to notice the delicate features beneath the wide-brimmed hat. "Got any work in these parts?" Zara asked in her practiced low voice, wincing at how unnatural it sounded to her own ears. The landlady pointed a flour-covered finger toward the livery stable. "Old Murphy's always needin' help with them horses. Pay ain't much, but it's honest work." Zara nodded her thanks and stepped into the morning light, each footfall a conscious effort to mimic the gait of the men she'd observed. The weight of her father's revolver pressed against her hip, concealed beneath the loose shirt, a constant reminder of what she'd lost and what she now needed to protect. Murphy, a grizzled man with more years of hard living etched into his face than he probably had left to live, eyed the slight young man before him with suspicion. "Ain't never worked with horses before, have you, boy?" he growled, his roomy eyes narrowing. "Some," Zara lied, lowering her voice further. "My pa had a few back east." Murphy spat a stream of tobacco juice that landed with precision in a nearby bucket. "Well, horses don't care much 'bout where you're from. They care if you treat 'em right." He tossed a pitchfork toward Zara, who caught it clumsily. "Start with the stalls. We'll see if you're worth feedin' by sundown." For 3 grueling weeks, Zara maintained her disguise, working from dawn until dusk. Her hands blistered and calloused, her muscles ached with unfamiliar labor. But each day brought improved strength and confidence in her deception. The stable became her sanctuary, and the horses, who cared nothing for human distinctions of gender, her silent confidants. It was the height of summer when Preston Miller rode into Riverton. The young cowboy's arrival stirred interest throughout the small town, particularly among the unmarried women who fluttered like butterflies whenever he passed. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a Wyoming sky, Preston had returned to take over his late uncle's cattle operation just north of town. Zara first encountered him while delivering a freshly shod horse to the saloon. As she secured the reins to the hitching post, a deep voice startled her. "That's fine horsemanship for someone so young." She turned to find Preston leaning against a support beam, watching her with curious eyes. Instinctively, she lowered her chin, hoping the shadow of her hat would conceal her features. "Murphy's a good teacher," she mumbled, trying to escape the conversation. Preston pushed away from the post and approached, extending his hand. "Preston Miller just took over the Double M Ranch." Zara hesitated before accepting the handshake, conscious of her smaller, smoother hand despite the calluses she'd developed. Zach Reed. Well, Zach, I'm looking for hands who know horses. Murphy speaks highly of you, said you've got away with the more spirited ones. Pride momentarily overrode caution. I just treat them with respect, is all. Preston's eyes, perceptive and warm, lingered on her face longer than was comfortable. Sometimes that's all any creature needs. His gaze dropped to her bound chest, which Zara had become expert at concealing under loose shirts, and then back to her face. Think about riding out to the Double M if you're looking for better pay. We could use someone with your touch. Zara nodded curtly and turned away, heart hammering. Something about the way he'd looked at her made her wonder if her disguise was as effective as she'd believed. The prospect of working at an isolated ranch with men who might discover her secret seemed too dangerous to contemplate. Yet 3 days later, when Murphy announced he was taking on his nephew and wouldn't need Zara's help anymore, the Double M became her only option unless she wanted to leave Riverton, and she wasn't ready to move on, not without her father's killers being brought to justice. The Double M Ranch sprawled across rolling hills northeast of Riverton, a modest but well-maintained operation with a main house, bunkhouse, and assorted outbuildings. As Zara approached on a borrowed horse, she spotted Preston mending a corral fence, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He straightened when he noticed her, a smile spreading across his tanned face. "Zach, you decided to take me up on my offer." "If it's still open," Zara replied, dismounting with the fluid motion she'd perfected over weeks of practice. "It is. Timing's good too. We're moving cattle to summer pasture tomorrow. Can you start today?" And so began Zara's life at the Double M, where her deception grew both easier and more difficult by turns. Easier because the routine of ranch work provided structure and purpose. More difficult because of Preston Miller's unsettling presence and the increasing complexity of maintaining her disguise among 6 other ranch hands. The bunkhouse posed immediate challenges. Zara claimed a corner bunk, using exhaustion as an excuse to turn in early and rise before the others. She bathed in a nearby creek during pre-dawn hours when darkness still clung to the landscape, and bound her chest even tighter, ignoring the discomfort as a necessary sacrifice. 2 months passed, bringing autumn's cooler temperatures and changing colors to the landscape. Zara's disguise had become second nature, her gestures and speech patterns so practiced they were almost natural. The ranch hands accepted Zach as a quiet, hard-working youngster who kept to himself but pulled his weight. All except for Dean, the foreman, whose narrow-eyed glances followed her movements with suspicion. "That boy ain't right," she overheard him telling Preston one evening as she returned from tending the horses. "Something off about him." Preston's response was measured. "He works harder than men twice his size. That's all I need to know. Doesn't talk about his past. Doesn't join in when the boys head to town. Don't trust it. Not everyone's got a past worth sharing, Dean. Leave the boy be." Zara slipped away, heart pounding. Dean's distrust could unravel everything she'd worked to build. She needed to be more careful, more convincing in her role. The opportunity came during a cattle drive when a sudden storm spooked the herd. In the chaos that followed, Zara found herself working alongside Preston to prevent a stampede. Rain lashed their faces as they rode hard, turning the frightened animals back toward safety. "You ride like you were born to it," Preston shouted over the thunder, his hair plastered to his forehead, eyes alight with the exhilaration of the moment. For the first time in months, Zara forgot to disguise her voice, responding with genuine joy. "I've never felt so alive." If Preston noticed the higher pitch of her excitement, he didn't show it. Instead, he flashed a grin that caused an unfamiliar warmth to bloom in her chest, a feeling she immediately suppressed. Such emotions had no place in her current existence. That night, huddled around a campfire as their clothes dried, the ranch hands passed a bottle of whiskey and shared tales of past adventures. Zara declined the bottle but found herself drawn into the camaraderie, offering a carefully edited story about learning to break horses with her father. Preston watched her from across the fire, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, he didn't look away, holding her gaze until she felt heat rise to her cheeks and turned her attention back to the flames. The following day, Preston assigned Zara to help him repair fencing in a remote section of the property. They worked in companionable silence for hours, the rhythm of hammers against wood punctuated only by occasional directions or questions. During a break, as they sat in the shade of a solitary oak tree sharing water from a canteen, Preston asked, "What really brought you to Riverton, Zach?" Zara stiffened. "Told you. Looking for work after my pa died. That part I believe." Preston studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "But there's more you're not saying." She focused on a distant ridge, choosing her words carefully. "Some stories aren't meant to be shared." "Fair enough." He handed back the canteen, his fingers brushing against hers. "Just know that whatever you're running from or hiding from, you've got friends here now." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her resolve. How long had it been since she'd spoken honestly with another person, since she'd been herself? The weight of her deception suddenly felt crushing. "My father was murdered," she admitted, surprising herself. "In Riverton, 3 men. I saw their faces." Preston's expression darkened. "Have you told the sheriff, Sheriff Wilkes?" Zara laughed bitterly. "He spent all of 5 minutes looking into it before declaring it a robbery gone wrong." "Case closed." "That doesn't sound right." "Nothing's been right since that day." The words emerged with more emotion than she intended, and she quickly stood, dusting off her trousers. "We should finish this section before sunset." Preston rose but didn't immediately return to work. "Zach," he said softly, "I'm sorry about your father, and I'm here if you ever want to talk more about it." Zara nodded, unable to trust her voice, and returned to hammering posts with more force than necessary. As autumn progressed toward winter, Zara found herself increasingly drawn to Preston. He was unlike any man she'd known, thoughtful, fair-minded, and possessed of a quiet strength that commanded respect without demanding it. The ranch hands, even Dean, looked to him for leadership, and he never disappointed. What troubled her most was how often she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't the suspicious scrutiny Dean sometimes directed her way, but something more contemplative, as if he were piecing together a puzzle. The first snow fell in early November, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas. Ranch work slowed with the season, allowing more time for indoor tasks and occasional trips to town for supplies. During one such journey, Zara accompanied Preston to Riverton, both to help load supplies and because she never missed an opportunity to scan the streets for her father's killers. While Preston negotiated with the mercantile owner, Zara stepped outside to secure their wagon. A commotion down the street drew her attention, 3 men emerging from the saloon, laughing raucously. She froze, heart stuttering in her chest. The tallest one, with a distinctive red beard and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, was unmistakable. One of the men who had gunned down her father. Without conscious thought, her hand moved to the revolver at her hip. She'd practiced with it religiously during her time at the Double M, determined that when this moment came, she would be ready. Yet as her fingers curled around the grip, Preston emerged from the store. "Zach." "Everything all right?" Zara released the gun, the moment of opportunity slipping away as the men disappeared around a corner. "Fine," she managed, though her voice sounded strained even to her own ears. Preston followed her gaze down the street. "Someone you know," thought I recognized someone. She turned back to the wagon, hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the straps. "It was nothing. Didn't look like nothing." Preston stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You went white as this snow. Was it one of them? The men who killed your father?" Surprised by his perceptiveness, Zara hesitated before giving a small nod. "Which one?" Red beard, scar over his eye. Preston's jaw tightened. "That's Lee Blackwater, runs with the Carson gang. They've been terrorizing settlements up and down the territory." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Zach, listen to me. Those men are dangerous. Whatever you're thinking, it's not worth getting yourself killed." The concern in his eyes was genuine, but Zara shrugged away from his touch. "They killed my father in cold blood. If the law won't hold them accountable, who will? Not a young." He paused almost imperceptibly. Man alone against 3 hardened outlaws. He glanced around the street before continuing. "Let me help. I've got connections in the territorial marshal's office. My cousin serves as a deputy marshal out of Cheyenne." Hope flared briefly before caution tamped it down. "Why would you risk helping me? You barely know me." Something shifted in Preston's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight curve of his lips. "I know enough." That evening, as they made their way back to the ranch under a sky strewn with stars, Zara felt a strange mixture of emotions. The prospect of justice for her father was suddenly more tangible than it had been in months. Yet Preston's offer of help complicated her carefully constructed existence. How much did he suspect? What would happen when her charade inevitably ended? Snow continued to fall intermittently over the next week, forcing most ranch work indoors. Zara spent her days mending tack in the barn, grateful for tasks that kept her hands busy and allowed her mind to wander. Preston had sent a letter to his cousin in Cheyenne, but winter weather would likely delay any response. One afternoon, as a particularly heavy snowfall blanketed the ranch, Preston found her alone in the barn. "Thought you might like some company," he said, holding up a steaming mug. "Coffee. Though I added something extra to ward off the chill." Zara accepted the mug gratefully, the warmth seeping through her gloves. The first sip revealed the something extra to be whiskey, its burn a welcome contrast to the bitter coffee. Preston settled on a hay bale opposite her, cradling his own mug between his hands. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the horses' occasional soft nickering and the muffled sound of snow against the roof. "Can I ask you something, Zach?" Preston finally broke the quiet. Zara tensed but nodded. "Where did you learn to move like that?" "Move like what?" "Like someone constantly aware they're being watched. Someone trying to be invisible while standing in plain sight." His gaze was steady, unaccusing. "I've been watching you for months now, trying to figure it out." Zara's mouth went dry. "Don't know what you're talking about," Preston sighed, setting down his mug. "I grew up with 4 sisters. I recognize the way you walk when you think no one's looking, when you forget to force your steps wider. I see how you tilt your head just so when listening." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "And I notice how you bind your chest under those shirts." The mug slipped from Zara's suddenly numb fingers, coffee splattering across the straw-covered floor. She stood abruptly, reaching for her gun. "How long have you known?" Her voice emerged in its natural pitch, no longer disguised. Preston remained seated, his expression gentle. "I suspected since that first day in town. Knew for certain during the storm when you forgot yourself and spoke without thinking." He made no move toward her, keeping his hands visible. "I haven't told anyone. It's not my secret to share." "Why?" Zara demanded, hands still hovering near her weapon. "Why keep quiet?" Because I figured you had good reason for the deception. Because you're the best hand with horses I've ever seen. Because—" He hesitated, a flush creeping up his neck. "Because I found myself caring what happened to you, whatever your name really is." Zara's hand dropped to her side as confusion replaced fear. "I don't understand." "Neither did I at first." Preston stood slowly. "I kept telling myself I was just concerned for a young hand under my protection. But it was more than that." He took a careful step toward her. "I'd like to know who you really are if you're willing to trust me." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility and danger. Zara had maintained her disguise for so long that revealing herself felt like stepping off a cliff. Yet the sincerity in Preston's eyes offered something she hadn't felt in months: safety. "My name is Zara Reed," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I didn't choose this disguise, it chose me the day they murdered my father." Preston nodded, as if confirming something he'd already known. "Why not seek help? Surely there were people in town who would have assisted a young woman in distress." Zara laughed bitterly. "A young woman alone is a target in these parts, Preston. I had no family, no connections, and 3 killers who might recognize me. The moment I saw them gun down my father for the money he was carrying to start our new life here." Her voice broke. "I knew I'd never be safe as Zara Reed again." "And now," Preston asked softly, "with Blackwater and his gang still in the area, now I'm better prepared." She gestured to the gun at her hip. "I've been practicing. When the time comes—" "It doesn't have to be you," Preston interrupted, taking another step closer. "My cousin's letter should arrive any day. The territorial marshals have been building a case against the Carson gang for months. Your testimony could be what they need to move against them." Hope warred with skepticism in Zara's heart. "And if the marshals fail? Or if the gang discovers I'm a witness before they're arrested? Then we'll face that together." Preston was close enough now that she could see the earnest determination in his eyes. "You don't have to carry this burden alone anymore, Zara." The sound of her real name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. How long had it been since someone had called her Zara? Since she'd felt like herself and not a shadow? "The others," she began hesitantly. "The ranch hands don't need to know until you're ready to tell them, if ever." Preston's hand hovered near hers, not quite touching. "Your secret is safe with me." Trust had become a foreign concept to Zara over the past months of deception. Yet something in Preston's steady gaze made her want to believe him to share the weight she'd been carrying. "Thank you," she whispered, allowing her fingers to briefly touch his. The connection, slight as it was, sent warmth cascading through her arm. Preston's eyes widened slightly, suggesting he'd felt it too. For a heartbeat, neither moved, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then the barn door banged open, and they sprang apart as Dean entered, stomping snow from his boots. "Preston, rider coming in, looks like it might be mail from town." "I'll be right there," Preston replied, his voice admirably steady despite the flush still evident on his cheeks. As Dean retreated, he turned back to Zara. "We'll continue this conversation later," she nodded, already readjusting her posture and expression to resume her role as Zack. The ease with which she slipped back into character troubled her. How much of herself had she lost in this necessary deception? The rider indeed brought mail, including a response from Preston's cousin, Deputy Marshal Thomas Miller. Preston read the letter in the privacy of his office before summoning Zara after dinner. "Thomas is coming," he told her, closing the door behind them. "He'll be in Riverton within the week, weather permitting. He wants to speak with you about what you witnessed." Zara paced the small room, nervous energy making it impossible to stay still. "What did you tell him about me?" "Only that I had a witness to one of the Carson gang's murders." "I didn't mention your current situation. That's yours to share or not. Relief flooded through her. And he believes he can build a case against them. The gang's been responsible for a string of robberies and killings across 3 territories. Your testimony could help connect Blackwater directly to a murder, strengthening the case against all of them. Preston leaned against his desk, watching her movements. But Zara, this means you'll eventually have to testify publicly, as yourself. The implication hung in the air between them. Her disguise would have to end. Zara Reed would disappear, and Zara would need to face the world and its dangers as herself again. I know, she said quietly, stilling her restless movement. It terrifies me. I've been Zach for so long now, I'm not sure I remember how to be Zara. Preston pushed away from the desk and crossed to where she stood, his eyes searching hers. May I? He asked, his hand hovering near her hat. Heart racing, she gave a small nod. With gentle movements, Preston removed the battered hat, revealing her cropped hair. His fingers brushed against a stray lock, tucking it behind her ear. I see Zara, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. I've always seen her, even when you tried to hide. The tenderness in his touch undid her. Months of fear, grief, and loneliness welled up, and for the first time since her father's death, Zara allowed herself to cry. Preston's arms encircled her, strong and steady as sobs shook her slender frame. It's all right, he whispered against her hair. You're safe now. You're not alone anymore. They remained like that, entwined in the soft lamplight of his office, until her tears subsided. As Zara pulled away slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown, Preston's hands came up to frame her face, thumbs gently wiping away the moisture on her cheeks. There she is, he said softly, a smile warming his features. The woman I've been wanting to know. The admiration in his eyes was unmistakable, igniting something long dormant within her. Before reason could intervene, Zara rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a brief, tentative kiss. Preston froze for a heartbeat before responding, his hand sliding to her waist as he returned the kiss with restrained passion. When they parted, both breathing unevenly, his forehead rested against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day of the storm, he admitted, his voice husky. Even when I wasn't sure who you really were. Zara's laugh was shaky but genuine. That must have been confusing, incredibly. His smile faded into seriousness. But I know now, and whatever comes next, we'll face it together. The promise in those words sustained Zara through the anxious days that followed. Outside, she maintained her disguise as Zach, working alongside the other hands. But in private moments with Preston, she allowed herself to be Zara again, speaking in her natural voice, moving without the self-conscious adjustments that had become second nature. 4 days after the letter arrived, Deputy Marshal Thomas Miller rode into the Double M Ranch during a break in the winter weather. Tall and broad-shouldered like his cousin, Thomas carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to authority. His assessing gaze took in the ranch hands, including Zara, with professional interest. Preston greeted him warmly before leading him into the main house. Later that evening, after the other hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Preston summoned Zara to a private meeting in the house. Thomas Miller's eyebrows rose slightly as Preston closed the office door behind them, but he offered no comment as Zara removed her hat. My cousin tells me you witnessed Edgar Blackwater murdering your father, the marshal said without preamble. I need to hear exactly what you saw. For the next hour, Zara recounted every detail of that terrible day, the 3 men approaching her father outside the general store, the demand for his money belt, the casual brutality with which they gunned him down when he hesitated. She described each man in painstaking detail. Blackwater with his red beard and scarred eyebrow, the second man, lean and snake-like with a distinctive limp, and the third, heavyset with a gold tooth that flashed when he laughed after the killing. Thomas took meticulous notes, interrupting occasionally to clarify a point or ask for additional details. When Zara finished her account, he studied her with newfound respect. That matches descriptions we have of Blackwater, Nathan Carson, and his brother Joseph. They've been working their way across the territories for nearly 2 years. He glanced at Preston before continuing. Miss Reed, your testimony could help us put them away for good, but I won't pretend it won't be dangerous. I understand the risks, Zara replied, straightening her shoulders. But I want justice for my father, and I want to reclaim my life. Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied with her resolve. We've received intelligence that the gang is planning something in Riverton soon. I've got men positioned in town, waiting for them to make their move. When they do, we'll arrest them. He closed his notebook. In the meantime, you should remain here where it's safer. Once we have them in custody, I'll send word. As the marshal prepared to leave, he pulled Preston aside for a private word. Zara couldn't hear their conversation, but the serious expressions on both men's faces sent a chill through her. Something about this plan worried them more than they were letting on. After Thomas departed, Preston found Zara in the barn, checking on a mare that had recently foaled. Thomas thinks you should remain disguised until the gang is captured, he said without preamble. Even here at the ranch, the fewer people who know your true identity, the safer you'll be. Zara stroked the mare's nose, considering his words. He's worried they might have informants, even here. He's being cautious. These men have evaded capture for 2 years. They're connected and dangerous. Preston moved closer, lowering his voice though they were alone. I don't think anyone here would betray you, but I understand his concern. So I continue as Zach until they're caught. Zara sighed, weariness settling over her. I've done it this long. A little longer won't matter. Preston's hand covered hers on the stall door. It won't be much longer, and then... The unspoken question hung between them. And then what? And then we'll see, Zara finished, turning her hand to interlace her fingers with his. The simple touch conveyed more than words could express: hope, promise, possibility. For the next 3 days, life at the Double M continued as usual, though tension simmered beneath the surface for Zara and Preston. Every approaching rider brought a surge of anticipation. Would this be Thomas's messenger with news of the gang's capture? On the 4th day, as a winter storm gathered on the horizon, Dean announced he needed to ride into Riverton for supplies before the weather turned. Preston, who'd been reluctant to let any of the hands venture into town while the Carson gang might be there, hesitated before giving his permission. Take Zach with you, he decided, catching Zara's eye across the barn. 2 of you can load the supplies faster and get back before the storm hits. Though she understood his reasoning, sending her to town with Dean meant she would have protection while also keeping her informed of any developments regarding the gang. Zara couldn't help feeling uneasy. Dean had never fully warmed to Zach, and spending hours alone with the taciturn foreman wasn't her idea of a pleasant outing. As they rode toward Riverton, the sky darkened ominously, promising heavy snow before nightfall. Dean maintained a stony silence for most of the journey, responding to Zara's attempts at conversation with grunts or single-word answers. Only as they approached the outskirts of town did he finally speak unprompted. Preston's been acting strange lately, ever since you showed up. Zara kept her expression neutral despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. Haven't noticed anything, Dean snorted. Course you have. He treats you different, watches you, has private meetings with you. His sideways glance was laden with suspicion. Makes a man wonder what's going on between you two. "We're friends," Zara replied carefully. "Nothing strange about that." "Friends," Dean repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "Right." He urged his horse ahead, ending the uncomfortable exchange. Riverton appeared unusually busy for a stormy weekday. Men Zara didn't recognize loitered outside the saloon and general store, their horses stamping restlessly at hitching posts. As she and Dean tied their mounts outside the mercantile, she noticed two men watching them with particular interest. Inside the store, the proprietor, Mr. Jenkins, seemed nervous, his usual friendly chatter reduced to terse instructions as he filled their order. When Dean stepped outside to check on something in their wagon, Jenkins leaned across the counter toward Zara. "You're from the Double M, right?" He whispered urgently. "Miller's place," Zara nodded, instantly alert. "There's trouble brewing. Carson gang's in town. Word is they're planning to hit the bank this afternoon." His eyes darted toward the door. "Marshall's men are here too, waiting for them to make their move." Whole town's like a powder keg. Before Zara could respond, the door swung open and Dean returned, followed by a gust of cold wind. Jenkins straightened immediately, resuming his task of gathering supplies. As they loaded their purchases into the wagon, Zara scanned the street with heightened awareness. If the Carson gang was indeed planning a bank robbery today, Thomas's men would be moving to arrest them soon. Her testimony might not even be needed if they were caught in the act. "Need to stop at the bank," Dean announced abruptly, securing the last crate. "Won't take long." Alarm shot through Zara. "The bank? We should head back, storm's coming fast." Dean's eyes narrowed. "Preston asked me to deposit the cattle sale money, won't take but a minute." Torn between revealing what she knew and maintaining her cover, Zara hesitated too long. Dean was already moving toward the bank, leaving her little choice but to follow or attract unwanted attention by arguing. The bank was crowded, customers hurrying to complete their business before the storm hit. Dean joined the line at the teller's window while Zara positioned herself near the door, vigilantly watching both the interior and the street through the large front window. That's when she saw him, Edgar Blackwater, dismounting from his horse across the street, accompanied by the Carson brothers. They moved with purposeful strides toward the bank, hands hovering near their weapons. Heart pounding, Zara scanned the street for Thomas's men but saw no obvious sign of lawmen preparing to intervene. The gang was moments away from entering the bank, and dozens of innocent people, including Dean, would be caught in the middle of whatever happened next. Making a split-second decision, Zara pushed through the bank doors onto the street, hand moving to her revolver. If she could delay them, even for a moment, it might give the marshals time to position themselves. "Blackwater," she called out, her voice cracking slightly as she abandoned its practiced deepness. The red-bearded man froze, his hand dropping to his gun as he turned toward the sound. His eyes narrowed as they focused on Zara, confusion evident in his expression as he tried to place the young man addressing him. "I know what you're planning," Zara continued, struggling to keep her voice steady. "And there are marshals waiting for you." Nathan Carson, the lean man with the limp, hissed something to Blackwater, who continued to stare at Zara with growing suspicion. "Do I know you, boy?" Blackwater growled, taking a step closer. Before Zara could respond, shouts erupted from both ends of the street as men who had been lounging against buildings suddenly produced badges and weapons. U.S. Marshals, hands in the air, chaos erupted. The Carson brothers immediately drew their guns, firing at the advancing lawmen. Blackwater, still focused on Zara, squinted as recognition slowly dawned in his eyes. "You're that girl," he snarled, reaching for his weapon. "From last spring." Zara drew her father's revolver, but before either could fire, Dean emerged from the bank behind her. "Zach, get down," he shouted, raising his own gun. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Blackwater fired, the bullet meant for Zara grazing Dean's shoulder as the foreman shoved her aside. Zara stumbled but kept her footing, bringing her weapon up and firing in one fluid motion just as her father had taught her years before. The bullet struck Blackwater in the chest. He staggered backward, shock registering on his face before he collapsed into the street's muddy snow. Gunfire continued to echo through Riverton as the marshals engaged the Carson brothers, but Zara barely registered it. She knelt beside Dean, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Why?" she demanded, pressing her bandana against the wound to stem the bleeding. Dean grimaced through the pain. "Figured out who you really were weeks ago. Preston made me swear not to let on that I knew." He attempted a wry smile. "Never liked you much as Zach, but couldn't let Blackwater shoot a woman, especially not Preston's woman." Before Zara could process this revelation, more shots rang out, followed by shouts announcing that Nathan Carson was down. Joseph, the heavyset brother, threw down his weapon in surrender, surrounded by marshals with rifles trained on his chest. Deputy Marshal Thomas Miller strode through the chaos, taking in the scene with a professional eye. When he reached Zara and Dean, he knelt briefly to check Blackwater's pulse before turning his attention to them. "Need to get him to a doctor," Zara said, still applying pressure to Dean's wound. Thomas nodded, gesturing for two of his men to assist. As they helped Dean to his feet, the marshal studied Zara with newfound respect. "You took a hell of a risk confronting them like that," he said. "Could have gotten yourself killed." Zara glanced at Blackwater's body, the reality of what she'd done beginning to sink in. "I couldn't let them walk into that bank. There were too many innocent people inside. Your warning gave us the chance to move in before they started shooting civilians." Thomas helped her to her feet. "But I think your disguise days are over, Miss Reed." Indeed, in the commotion, Zara's hat had fallen away, and her bound chest was evident beneath her now open coat. Several townsfolk were staring openly at the transformation of the quiet, stable boy they'd known into this gun-wielding young woman. News traveled quickly in frontier towns. By the time a doctor had seen to Dean's wound, declaring it a minor injury that would heal cleanly, and Thomas had taken Zara's formal statement about both the bank confrontation and her father's murder, half of Riverton knew that Zach Reed was actually Zara Reed, a young woman who had been hiding in plain sight for months. The approaching storm forced them to remain in town overnight. Thomas arranged a room for Zara at the hotel, her first night in women's accommodations since her father's death. The proprietor's wife, a kindly woman named Mrs. Perkins, provided a simple dress and helped Zara wash the trail dust from her hair. Looking in the mirror after her bath, Zara barely recognized herself. The short hair framed her face differently than her once long locks had, emphasizing her high cheekbones and large eyes. Without the binding, her feminine figure was obvious even in the borrowed dress, which hung somewhat loosely on her frame. "You're quite pretty, dear," Mrs. Perkins commented as she helped arrange Zara's hair as fashionably as its length would allow. "Must have been difficult, hiding all these months." "It was necessary," Zara replied simply, unused to discussing her circumstances with anyone besides Preston. With everything that had happened, she hadn't had time to consider what this revelation meant for their budding relationship. Would he still feel the same now that she was openly Zara? Now that everyone knew she had deceived them all for months, a knock at her door interrupted these anxious thoughts. Mrs. Perkins answered it, exchanging a few words with someone in the hallway before turning back to Zara with a knowing smile. "Mr. Miller is asking if you join him for dinner downstairs." Shall I tell him you'll be down shortly? Heart racing, Zara nodded. Thank you. Just give me a moment. After Mrs. Perkins departed, Zara took a deep breath, smoothing the borrowed dress with trembling hands. This would be their first meeting in public with her true identity, revealed the first step into whatever future awaited them. Preston was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt, despite having obviously ridden hard through the beginnings of the storm to reach Riverton after hearing about the shootout. His eyes widened as Zara descended, taking in her transformed appearance with undisguised admiration. You look beautiful, he said simply when she reached him, offering his arm. I feel strange, Zara admitted as he led her to a corner table in the hotel's small dining room. Exposed. Everyone's staring. They're curious, Preston replied, pulling out her chair. It's not every day a young woman single-handedly stops a notorious outlaw and saves a town from a bank robbery. That's not exactly how it happened, she protested, though she couldn't help smiling at his characterization. Close enough according to Thomas and the witnesses. Preston's expression grew serious as he reached across the table to take her hand. You could have been killed, Zara. When I heard what happened, I know it was reckless, she interrupted, but I couldn't stand by and watch them hurt more people, not when I had the chance to stop them. Pride shone in Preston's eyes. Your father would be proud of your courage, as am I. He squeezed her hand gently. Though I'd appreciate if future acts of heroism involved slightly less mortal danger. They shared a laugh, the tension of the day's events finally beginning to ease. As they ate their simple meal, Preston updated her on developments at the ranch, how he'd left as soon as a ranch hand had galloped in with news of the shootout, leaving instructions for the others to secure everything against the storm. Dean knew who I was, Zara said when there was a lull in the conversation. He said you made him promise not to reveal that he knew. Preston nodded, a sheepish expression crossing his features. He figured it out about a month ago, saw you bathing in the creek at dawn. Came to me ready to fire the lying boy on the spot. His lips quirked in a half-smile. Took some convincing to make him understand why you'd chosen to disguise yourself, and more convincing still to keep your secret until you were ready to reveal it yourself. He took a bullet for me today, Zara said quietly. I never thought he even liked me. Dean's a good man beneath that gruff exterior, loyal to those he considers family. Preston's gaze held hers steadily. And he considers you family now, Zara, as do I, though perhaps in a different way. The implication in his words sent warmth coursing through her. What happens now, Preston? Everyone knows who I really am. I can't go back to being Zach, even if I wanted to. Do you want to? He asked, his expression suddenly vulnerable. Go back to hiding, I mean. Zara considered the question seriously. No, she finally said. It was necessary for a time, but it was exhausting, always watching every word, every movement, always afraid of discovery. She met his gaze directly. I want to be myself again, whatever that means now. Relief softened Preston's features. I'm glad, because I've fallen in love with Zara Reed, and I'd very much like the chance to court her properly if she'll have me. Though she had sensed his feelings, hearing them declared so openly stole Zara's breath. For months, her sole focus had been survival and justice. The possibility of love had seemed as distant as the stars. I'd like that, she whispered, a smile blooming across her face. Very much. The blizzard that had threatened all day finally descended upon Riverton that night, forcing them to remain in town for 3 additional days. During that time, Zara gave formal testimony about her father's murder to Judge Wilson, who had been snowed in while passing through on circuit. With Blackwater dead and both Carson brothers in custody, the judge assured her that justice would be served for her father and the gang's other victims, Mrs. Perkins and several other town women, enchanted by Zara's story and impressed by her courage, gifted her with clothing more suitable for a young woman than the men's attire she'd worn for months. Though Zara accepted their generosity with gratitude, she found herself strangely uncomfortable in dresses after so long in more practical clothing. "You don't have to wear them if you don't want to," Preston told her as they walked arm in arm through town on the day the roads finally cleared enough for travel. "Plenty of women in the territories wear trousers for riding and ranch work. No reason you can't do the same." "People will talk," Zara pointed out, though the idea appealed to her. Preston laughed. "Zara, you lived among them as a boy for months and then shot a notorious outlaw in the middle of Main Street. I think they've already accepted that you're not a conventional woman." When they finally returned to the Double M, Zara was surprised by the welcome that awaited her. The ranch hands, who had heard the full story from Dean, greeted her with awkward but sincere congratulations and none of the condemnation she had feared. Most admitted they'd been completely fooled by her disguise, a fact that seemed to amuse rather than anger them now that the deception's purpose was understood. "Never did understand why Zach was so dang good with the skittish mares," one of the older hands commented, drawing laughter from the others. "Makes sense now." Life settled into a new pattern as winter deepened. Zara continued working with the horses, now openly as herself, wearing a practical combination of riding skirts and her familiar shirts. Preston courted her with a thoroughness that both amused and touched her, bringing wildflowers preserved from autumn, reading aloud by lamplight in the evenings, teaching her to dance in the privacy of the main house's parlor. Their first proper kiss as a courting couple came during one such dancing lesson, as Preston guided her through a waltz hummed in his surprisingly melodious voice. When the improvised music ended, they remained in each other's arms, snowflakes drifting past the window as the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after my father died," Zara confessed, her cheek resting against Preston's chest. "Survival was all I could think about." Preston's hand gently tilted her face up to his. "And now I'm thinking about living, not just surviving." She rose on tiptoe, meeting his lips in a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. As winter gave way to spring, Preston surprised Zara with a trip to Cheyenne for the trial of the Carson brothers. Though she was nervous about testifying, having Preston beside her gave her the strength to face the courtroom and recount both her father's murder and the attempted bank robbery in clear, unwavering detail. Justice was swift in the territories. Both brothers were sentenced to hang for their crimes, bringing final closure to the tragedy that had set Zara on her unusual path. The journey back to Riverton took them past the small cemetery where Zara's father had been buried. They stopped, and Preston waited patiently as Zara knelt beside the simple marker, laying wildflowers on the grave that she hadn't dared visit while in disguise. "I did it, Pa," she whispered. "I found justice for you, and I found my way forward." She glanced back at Preston, who stood respectfully at a distance. "I think you would have liked him." When she rejoined Preston, he took her hand, his expression serious. "I've been thinking, Zara, about our future." Her heart skipped a beat at the word "our." Despite their growing closeness over the past months, they had spoken little of long-term plans. "The Double M is doing well," he continued. "Well enough that I've been considering expanding. There's a piece of land adjoining our northern pasture, good water, good grazing." He paused, suddenly seeming nervous. "It would make a fine homestead for a family, our family, if you do me the honor of becoming my wife." Though Zara had begun to hope for such a proposal, its arrival still left her momentarily speechless. Preston mistook her silence for hesitation. "I know it might seem soon," he hurried on. "And if you need time to consider—" Zara silenced him with a kiss, throwing her arms around his neck with such enthusiasm that Preston staggered slightly before regaining his balance and returning her embrace. "Is that a yes?" he asked when they finally parted, hope shining in his eyes. "Yes," Zara laughed, happiness bubbling through her like a spring creek. "Yes, Preston Miller, I will marry you." They were wed in early summer, in a ceremony that combined traditional elements with touches that honored Zara's unique journey. She wore a beautiful cream-colored dress, but insisted on riding boots beneath it. "Just in case I need to make a quick escape," she had teased Preston, who had responded that he would simply have to give her no reason to run. Dean, fully recovered from his wound, served as Preston's best man. Mrs. Perkins, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Zara during her time in town, helped with the arrangements and wept openly during the vows. The double MTK's main house, expanded with a new wing during the spring, became their home. Preston had included a study for Zara. Complete with bookshelves for the volumes, she'd begun collecting tales of adventure and romance that fed her imagination during quiet evenings. As summer progressed into autumn, Zara found herself reflecting on how completely her life had transformed in just over a year. From a desperate young woman forced into disguise to survive, she had become the confident mistress of a thriving ranch, respected in the community not despite her unusual past but partly because of it. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Miller," Preston said one evening, finding her on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "Just thinking about how strange life can be," she replied, leaning into his embrace as he joined her at the railing. "A year ago I was certain I'd spend the rest of my life hiding, never able to be myself again. And now—" "And now," Preston prompted, pressing a kiss to her temple, "now I'm exactly who I'm meant to be." She turned in his arms, a smile illuminating her face, "And I'm exactly where I belong." As twilight deepened into night, bringing forth the first stars above the Wyoming landscape, Zara knew with bone-deep certainty that her father would be at peace. She had found not just justice, but something he had always wanted for her, a life filled with purpose, respect, and love. The following spring brought new beginnings to the Double M Ranch. Zara, her belly gently rounded with their first child, continued to work with the horses as long as Preston and the local doctor deemed it safe. Her reputation as a horse trainer had spread beyond Riverton, bringing ranchers from as far as Montana Territory to see the woman who could gentle the most difficult animals with methods that emphasized patience and understanding rather than breaking their spirit. "Just like how you gentled me," Preston teased one evening as they sat before the fireplace, his hand resting on her growing belly. Zara laughed, threading her fingers through his. "As I recall, you weren't particularly wild when we met, a bit too perceptive for my comfort, perhaps." "I'm grateful every day that I saw past your disguise," Preston said, his voice turning serious. "Not just to the woman hiding beneath, but to the extraordinary person you are, Zara." Their son, Edward Thomas Miller, was born as summer ripened across the land, a healthy, robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. Preston wept openly when Zara placed the infant in his arms for the first time, overwhelmed by the perfect new life they had created together. "He's going to have quite the story to tell someday," Preston said, watching his son's tiny fingers curl around his own. About his remarkable mother who once outshot the notorious Edgar Blackwater. A heavily edited version, perhaps, Zara replied with a smile. "At least until he's older." As young Edward grew, so too did the double MTK's prosperity. Preston's innovative ranching methods and Zara's expanding horse training business made them one of the most successful operations in the territory. They reinvested their profits in improvements to the ranch and in the community, helping to establish Riverton's first proper school and contributing to the building of a new church. 2 years after Edward's birth, they welcomed a daughter, Lillian Mary, who arrived during a spring thunderstorm with a lusty cry that, according to Dean, could be heard clear to the north pasture. With her mother's auburn hair and a temperament that matched the storm of her birth, Lily quickly became the apple of her father's eye and her brother's fiercest protector, despite their age difference. Life wasn't without its challenges. The harsh Wyoming winters, occasional drought summers, and the ever-present risks of frontier living tested their resilience regularly. But Zara and Preston faced each obstacle as they had from the beginning together, with determination and unwavering trust in each other. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Preston surprised Zara with a small wooden chest he had commissioned from a craftsman in Cheyenne. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay her father's pocket watch, restored to working condition, alongside the revolver she had used to end Blackwater's reign of terror. "To remember where you came from," Preston explained as Zara ran her fingers over the familiar objects. "And to remind our children someday of their heritage of courage." Beside these artifacts of her past lay a small leather-bound journal, her future, waiting to be written. "I thought you might want to record your story someday," Preston said. "Not just for our family, but for others who might draw strength from knowing how a young woman found her way through impossible circumstances." Deeply moved by his thoughtfulness, Zara embraced her husband, thinking of how far they had come from those uncertain days when she had first arrived at the Double M disguised as a young man with secrets burning in her heart. "Our story isn't over yet," she whispered against his lips. "We're still writing it every day." As the years passed, the legend of Zara Reed Miller spread throughout the Wyoming territory and beyond. Children in Riverton grew up hearing tales of the woman who had lived as a boy to survive and found love with the rancher who saw the truth behind her disguise. Young women facing their own challenges drew inspiration from her example of courage and determination. The Double M Ranch expanded further, eventually encompassing enough land to secure the family's prosperity for generations to come. Edward, growing into a thoughtful young man with his father's business acumen and his mother's affinity for horses, gradually assumed more responsibility for the ranch operations. Lily, fiercely independent and adventurous, developed a talent for veterinary medicine, studying formally in Denver before returning to apply her knowledge to the ranch's livestock and the community's needs. Zara eventually wrote her memoir, as Preston had suggested, though she kept it private until their children were grown enough to understand the complex realities of her journey. When finally published, The Woman Within became a sensation, its honest portrayal of frontier life through a woman's eyes opening readers to perspectives rarely acknowledged in traditional Western narratives. Preston's hair silvered prematurely, adding distinguished character to his handsome features as he entered middle age. Zara teased that it was the result of raising their spirited children rather than the demanding work of ranching. Her own auburn locks remained largely untouched by gray until much later, though fine lines appeared around her eyes from years of squinting into Wyoming's brilliant sunlight and from the laughter that filled their home. Through it all the years of growth and change, joy and occasional sorrow, the foundation of their relationship remained unshaken. The trust and respect that had begun during those uncertain days when Zara was still disguised, as Zach deepened into a partnership that neither took for granted. On warm summer evenings, they still sat together on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes, they spoke of the past of the desperate young woman who had hidden her identity to survive, and the perceptive rancher who had seen beyond her disguise to the strength and courage within. More often, they talked of the present and future, their children's achievements, the ranch's prosperity, the community they had helped to build. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked once, during their 20th anniversary celebration. "Having to become someone else for all those months?" "Everything you went through?" Zara considered the question seriously, as she always did. "No," she finally answered, her hand finding his with the ease of long practice. "It was a difficult path, but it led me here to you, to our children, to this life we've built together." She smiled, the years having only enhanced the quiet strength that had captivated Preston from the beginning. "Besides, Zach is still part of me in some ways. I learned things about myself during that time that I might never have discovered otherwise. Like your exceptional skill with a revolver." Preston teased, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Among other things," Zara laughed. "Though I'm grateful I've had no occasion to use that particular skill in many years." As twilight deepened into night, bringing forth the stars above the Wyoming landscape that had become so deeply entwined with their story, Zara rested her head on Preston's shoulder. The young woman who had once been forced to hide her true self to survive had found not just safety but profound fulfillment in being exactly who she was meant to be. The gentle breeze carried the scents of sage and pine, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the soft nickering of horses in their paddocks, the soundtrack of the life they had built together. Zara closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, to this moment of perfect contentment under a canopy of Wyoming stars. In the heart of the untamed West, she had lost her father, found her strength, and ultimately discovered a love that had seen beyond disguise to the woman within. It was a love story unlike any other born of desperate circumstances, but nurtured by mutual respect, shared courage, and unwavering devotion. And as Preston's arm tightened around her shoulders, drawing her closer in the growing chill of evening, Zara knew with absolute certainty that this was the happy ending her father would have wished for her, a life rich with purpose, surrounded by love, and lived with the authenticity she had once feared she would never reclaim.